Every skyscraper has blueprints. Every blockbuster, well, it has a director. And every single successful tech innovation, I mean, think about the apps on your phone, the networks powering your campus, everything has something just as vital.
Right. IT project management.
Exactly.
Mm.
Without it, the world's most ambitious ideas, they just collapse before they even launch. Doesn't matter how brilliant the tech is.
That's absolutely right. The digital world doesn't succeed by accident. It really succeeds through, well, rigorous planning, constant vigilance, and structured execution.
And the foundation for that success, especially in the, let's face it, volatile world of IT,
Oh, absolutely.
is mastering project risk management, PRM.
Mm-hmm. PRM. That's what we're diving into today.
We are diving deep today into the art, and maybe the science too, of spotting trouble before it spots you. And just as importantly, I think, spotting those unexpected gold mines of opportunity.
Yes. The upside.
Our mission here is really to explore the genesis of project management, but focusing specifically today on risk concepts and techniques.
Right. So for you listening, maybe you're a graduate student, maybe you're just curious about how leadership turns complex IT theory into real-world impact.
Yeah, this is where you learn to plan, lead, and actually deliver those game-changing projects effectively.
We've pulled together a really solid set of sources for this. We're drawing from the rigor of the Project Management Institute PMI.
Standards, yeah.
And complementing that with some crucial real-world case studies. Looking at failures, but also practical application.
We want to go beyond just definitions, right? We want to break down those 7 core processes, the critical analysis tools, and really understand how risk management operates as this continuous living thing within any successful project.
Couldn't have said it better. It's ongoing.
Okay, so before we properly jump in, just take a quick second. If you like what you hear, please like, follow, share, and definitely check out the description. We've put links to all the resources we use for this deep dive in there.
Please do. Okay, where should we start? The foundation.
Start right there. The absolute foundation. Defining risk and really understanding the high stakes involved. Okay, so let's unpack this core concept first. Risk. When we talk about it in a professional setting like IT project management, it's way more nuanced than just saying danger, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. In project management, risk has a very formal dual definition.
Dual, okay.
Yeah. Risk is formally defined as an uncertain event or condition that, if it happens, has a negative or a positive effect on your project objectives.
Okay, negative or positive, that's the key part.
That is the critical element. And honestly, it's the part that often gets overlooked when teams are rushing, that duality. Risk isn't only about threats, the downside stuff.
Right.
It's equally about identifying and capitalizing on opportunities, the upside risks.
That distinction, it feels like it changes the entire approach to how you manage, doesn't it?
It has to.
Like if you're a project manager building a new campus network, okay, a negative risk might be pretty obvious. A supply chain disruption delays your core switches. You plan defensively for that.
Exactly. You build in buffer time, maybe look for alternate suppliers, classic mitigation.
But then the positive side.
Right. An opportunity might pop up. Maybe the network team discovers some brand new, just released tech standard.
Okay.
And if you adopt it, maybe it could boost data throughput by, say, 30% beyond what you originally specified. That dramatically enhances the project's value.
Huge value add.
But seizing that opportunity requires you to plan offensively. You might need to invest extra resources, do more testing, maybe adjust the schedule slightly to make that uncertain but positive event happen.
So it's not just preventing loss, it's actively seeking gain.
Precisely.
Right.
And, traditional methodologies often focus almost exclusively on the loss prevention side. But a mature organization, a mature project manager, recognizes risk management as strategic value creation too.
Okay, so if we accept the duality threats and opportunities, what does that really change about how we structure, say, the initial risk identification meeting?
Oh, it changes everything from the get-go. You need to give equal focus, equal time to asking what could go wrong here and what could go unexpectedly right.
Balanced perspective.
Balance. But, this project-level perspective, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's framed by something much bigger. The organization's overall attitude towards risk.
Ah, the organizational context.
Right.
Yeah.
It dictates the boundaries you, as the project manager, can actually operate within.
Yeah, so we need to talk about 3 key terms here, these hierarchical terms that define that organizational risk attitude. These come straight from the PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge. First, the highest level.
Right.
Risk appetite.
Right. Risk appetite. Think of this as the overall degree of uncertainty an organization is willing to take on, basically in anticipation of getting some potential reward. It's like the organizational philosophy on risk.
So like a startup versus a bank.
Exactly. A cutting-edge tech startup might have a really high appetite. They might be willing to risk, say, a 50% chance of complete project failure if the payoff is a revolutionary new product.
High risk, high reward.
Totally. But then you take a major financial institution, they're going to operate with an extremely low risk appetite, especially when it comes to things like regulatory compliance or data security. That appetite sets the overarching policy tone.
Okay, so appetite is the philosophy. Then you have risk tolerance. That sounds more specific.
It is more specific. Tolerance is the volume of risk the organization will actually withstand. It's the maximum acceptable deviation from the plan.
Give me an example.
Okay, so the organization might tolerate a schedule delay of up to, say, 2 weeks, but absolutely not 4 weeks. Or maybe they can handle a cost overrun up to 5% of the total budget, but anything over that is unacceptable. It's about quantifiable limits.
Yeah, limits. And the third one?
The third one is the risk threshold. This is even more granular. It's the specific level, often a measured level like impact score or probability percentage, below which a risk is just accepted without needing further action, or above which it must be escalated.
Okay, so like a trigger point.
Exactly. An organization might decide, for instance, that any security risk with less than a 10% probability and a potential impact under $50,000 is just automatically accepted. The project team handles it, no need to bother the executives.
Yeah.
But if it crosses that threshold...
He goes upstairs.
Right. So these three concepts, appetite setting the tone, tolerance setting the volume, and threshold setting the trigger points, they work together to define the sandbox you, the project manager, get to play in.
And that organizational stuff, it filters right down to the people actually on the project team, doesn't it? Our own personal feelings about risk. PMI calls it risk utility.
Risk utility. And it plays a huge role, often unconsciously. If you're naturally risk averse, you have a lower personal tolerance for uncertainty. You actively try to avoid it.
You play it safe.
You play it safe. If you're risk seeking, you actually have a high tolerance. You might even actively look for those high risk, high reward situations. It's exciting.
The thrill seeker.
Sort of. And then most of us, and probably most professional decisions, try to land somewhere in the middle. We aim to be risk neutral, making decisions based more on objective analysis than gut feeling about risk.
Understanding that team dynamic seems crucial.
Oh, it is, because it influences judgment calls all the time. Imagine a company that is highly risk averse, very conservative.
Okay.
Now, what happens if you put a really risk-seeking team lead in charge of a mission-critical system migration?
Uh-oh, mismatch.
Big mismatch. Their personal utility, their comfort with risk, is going to push them towards potentially high-risk, high-reward solutions that might completely violate the organization's mandate for stability and caution. It's a recipe for conflict, if not disaster.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So this brings us right to the core issue, the why.
Right.
Why is formal project risk management such a necessity for IT success, not just some, optional admin task?
Because when risk is poorly managed, the costs are just staggering. It validates the need for these structured processes we're talking about.
Staggering how? Give us some examples.
Okay, well, we have some pretty striking real-world failure examples that really underscore the financial and operational consequences. Consider the infamous London whale incident at J.P. Morgan a few years back.
I remember that. Huge loss.
Massive. A $6 billion loss. And it wasn't just some random market fluctuation. It was traceable directly back to inadequate risk oversight within the bank.
$6 billion. And when you dig into the root cause, wasn't part of it down to, using error-prone Excel spreadsheets for complex modeling?
That was a significant part of it. They were relying on unverified models. The risk wasn't just that the market might move against them. A key risk was the uncertainty tied to relying on a flawed internal calculation system. That's a clear failure in identifying and mitigating the risk of modeling errors, maybe even technical debt in their tools.
Wow. So the risk was in their own process for managing risk.
Precisely. The organization failed to adequately identify and mitigate the inherent risk in the system used to calculate risk. It's almost ironic.
Almost.
Or look at some of these massive public sector and commercial IT disasters. They teach the same hard lesson. Structure and oversight matter immensely.
Like which ones?
Well, the National Health Service IT disaster in the UK, that project cost somewhere around £10 billion.
£10 billion.
And ultimately failed. primarily due to things like wildly ambitious scope, scope creep, and major governance failures. These are all risks, scope risk, governance risk, that absolutely should have been managed proactively through things like careful scope avoidance or stricter contract transference with vendors.
Okay, that's a huge public sector example. What about commercial?
I'm reminded of the retail chain Lidl's attempt to implement SAP. It turned into a 500 million debacle.
€500 million.
Yep. After 7 years of work, they had to scrap the entire system and go back to their old inventory process.
Ouch. Why did it fail so badly?
Fundamentally, the project failed to effectively integrate the new SAP system with their existing complex business processes. It highlights a massive failure in identifying key risks early on. Integration risk, uncertainty around requirements, maybe a lack of sustained management support.
Which sources consistently show are the critical success factors, right? User involvement, exec support, clear requirements. Managing the risks around those is key.
Exactly. These examples, the London Whale, the NHS, Lidl, they starkly illustrate that the structured approach we're about to discuss isn't just academic theory. It's often the critical difference between a multi-billion-dollar success story and a headline-making, career-ending catastrophe.
Okay, the stakes are incredibly high. So let's get into the how. So we know the stakes. We know why we need to do this. The question now is, how do we actually bring structure and discipline into this, well, often chaotic world of uncertainty in IT projects?
That's where the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the PMBOK guide, provides a really useful framework. It structures risk management as a continuous life cycle. It's composed of 7 core processes.
7. And the key is continuous life cycle, right? It's not a one-and-done checklist.
Absolutely vital. It's not something you just do at the beginning and then forget about. Risk management starts early, during planning, it continues right through execution, and it needs to be constantly monitored and adjusted. It's an ongoing management function for the entire team.
Okay, so where does this cycle begin?
It begins, logically enough, with process 1, plan risk management.
Plan how to manage risk. Makes sense.
Exactly. This first process is all about defining how you're going to approach and perform risk management activities throughout this specific project. It's the foundational document, the rule book, that stops teams from just improvising their risk approach when, a crisis hits halfway through.
So what comes out of this planning process? What's the key output?
The key output is the risk management plan itself. And this plan needs to be detailed. It's not just a paragraph saying, we'll manage risks. It needs to define the specific methodology you'll use. For example, will you rely mostly on qualitative analysis, or do you need quantitative methods too? It spells out the roles and responsibilities crucially. It identifies who the risk owner will be for each risk you identify later on.
Assigning ownership, that sounds critical.
It is. If nobody explicitly owns a risk, then guess what? Nobody actively tracks the mitigation effort and things fall through the cracks.
Makes sense. What else is in this plan?
The plan also specifies timing, like how often will risk review meetings happen? Weekly, bi-weekly. It addresses funding, where will any contingency reserves come from? And very importantly, it establishes the definitions of probability and impact for this project.
What do you mean by definitions?
Well, what does high probability actually mean in the context of this project? Is it 70%, 90%? And what constitutes a catastrophic impact? Is it a schedule delay over a month, a cost overrun over $1 million? You need project-specific scales defined upfront so everyone's speaking the same language when assessing risks later.
Okay, standardized scales.
Got it. Any key tools introduced here? Yes, a really critical tool often introduced in this planning phase is the risk breakdown structure, or RBS.
RBS, like a WBS, a work breakdown structure.
Exactly like that concept. It's a hierarchical categorization of potential risk sources. Think of it like an organizational chart, but for potential problems.
Why is categorizing risks so important right at the start?
Because categorization helps ensure that you're looking for risks from every possible angle. It prevents blind spots. If your team only focuses on, say, technical risks, things like code bugs or server failures or integration issues,
You might miss something huge.
you might completely miss massive management risks, like poor communication channels or lack of stakeholder commitment. Or you might ignore commercial risks, like a key vendor going bankrupt, or sudden changes in market conditions, or external risks, like new regulations.
So the RBS forces a more comprehensive view.
It forces comprehensive thinking. You typically organize risks into broad categories, maybe technical, external, organizational, project management, etc. And then you drill down into more specific types of risks within those categories. It structures the identification process that comes next.
Okay, so we've planned how we'll manage risk. We've set up our categories with the RBS. What's next in the cycle?
Once we have the rules of the game defined in the risk management plan, we move into process 2. Identify risks.
Finding the actual risks. This sounds straightforward, but I suspect it's not.
You suspect correctly. It sounds simple, but this is often one of the hardest processes to do well. A key challenge is distinguishing between the symptom or the effect of a risk and the real risk itself, which is always rooted in uncertainty, the root cause.
Okay, symptom versus root cause. Give me an example.
Let's use a good analogy. Imagine we're managing a project to migrate a hospital's patient database system. During testing, we notice the new application is running really slowly sometimes.
Okay, slowness. That's the problem.
That slowness is the effect, or the symptom. It's not the risk itself. The real risk lies in the underlying uncertainty that caused the slowness. Maybe it's a lack of clarity on the database indexing requirements for the new platform, or perhaps there's configuration uncertainty about the new virtual server infrastructure it's running on.
So the risk is the uncertainty about the configuration or the requirements, not the slowness itself.
Exactly. The uncertainty is what we need to manage. So we need systematic methods during identification to get past those surface effects and really dig down to find the root uncertainties.
This is where our research skills, our analytical skills, really come into play then, SO1.
Absolutely. We are systematically hunting for known risks. These are the risks we can identify up front and analyze, the ones we can actually plan specific responses for.
Known risks.
And we need to differentiate those from the unknown risks. These are the ones we couldn't reasonably foresee. We can't plan for them specifically, so they have to be managed differently, usually through broader contingency funds called management reserves, or handled with workarounds if they pop up.
Knowns versus unknowns. How do we find the knowns systematically? What techniques work well?
There are several good techniques. Simple brainstorming is common, gets ideas flowing. But it can be susceptible to, groupthink or dominant personalities overshadowing quieter voices.
Right. The loudest person isn't always right.
Definitely not. That's why techniques like the Delphi technique are so valuable, especially when you're dealing with projects involving, say, multiple highly specialized or opinionated experts.
Delphi. How does that work?
In the Delphi method, experts provide their feedback and risk assessments anonymously. It's usually done through several rounds of questionnaires or surveys facilitated by someone neutral. The facilitator aggregates the anonymous feedback, shares it back to the group, and lets them revise their opinions based on the collective input, again anonymously.
Ah, anonymity is key.
It's key. It helps avoid the bandwagon effect or the influence of hierarchy or strong personalities. It allows you to work towards a genuine expert consensus on the likelihood and impact of risks, giving you a much more objective picture.
Okay, Delphi for expert consensus. What else?
We also leverage standard strategic analysis tools. SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. Threats is a great example.
SWOT. I think of that more for business strategy.
It's a general strategic tool, absolutely. But it's actually perfect for risk identification because it forces you to look both internally and externally, and it covers both sides of the risk coin. Weaknesses and threats directly map to your negative risks.
Okay.
And strengths and opportunities help you identify those positive risks, the upside potential you want to capture. It forces that balanced view we talked about earlier.
Nice application. Are there visual tools too?
Yes, definitely. For drilling down into root causes, diagramming techniques are essential. The Ishikawa diagram, also known as the fishbone diagram, is a classic for root cause analysis, or RCA.
Fishbone, okay. How does that help find the real risk?
Imagine a scenario where, say, a critical web application in your production environment keeps crashing intermittently. That's the effect.
Right, the symptom.
Using a fishbone diagram, you draw the crash as the head of the fish. Then you brainstorm potential causes and map them along the bones of the fish, typically categorized under headings like people, process, technology, environment, materials, etc.
So you explore all possible contributing factors.
Systematically, it helps the team move beyond blaming individuals and define the real underlying risk. For instance, you might trace the crashes back not just to bad code, but to the inadequate version control process allows untested configuration files to be deployed, or insufficient load testing failed to identify infrastructure bottlenecks. The process uncertainty or testing inadequacy is the risk you need to manage.
Got it. Define the real risk. The uncertainty, not just the effect.
That's the goal. And once you've used these techniques, brainstorming, Delphi, SWOT, Fishbone, maybe others like interviews or checklist analysis, and you've systematically identified potentially hundreds of these risks, both the threats and the opportunities.
Where do they all go?
They all flow into the single most essential output of this entire identification process, the risk register, sometimes called a risk log.
The risk register, the central document.
It is the central living document for all information related to identified risks. At a minimum, it needs to list every risk you've identified, include a clear description of the risk, the uncertainty, assign a potential owner responsible for tracking it, maybe capture an initial qualitative assessment like probability and impact, and list potential response strategies you've thought of.
And the living document is key, right? It's not static.
Absolutely not. This document must be regularly reviewed, updated, maintained, and shared widely with the team and stakeholders. It becomes the central hub, the dashboard for the entire project risk management process going forward.
Okay, so we've used our techniques, we've filled up the risk register with potentially hundreds of identified risks. Now what? We can't possibly tackle every single one with the same level of effort.
Exactly. That would be totally inefficient, probably impossible. So the next logical step, the core purpose of risk analysis, is to prioritize. We need to figure out which of these risks deserve our immediate attention and resources.
How do we do that?
We determine the probability of each risk occurring and the potential impact if it does. This analysis helps us sort the list and focus our efforts where they'll have the most effect. This takes us into the next couple of processes in the PMBOK framework: qualitative and quantitative risk analysis.
Okay, let's start with qualitative. That sounds maybe simpler.
It generally is simpler, faster, and more subjective. Perform qualitative risk analysis is process 3 in the PMBOK structure, and honestly, it's used on almost every single project, regardless of size or complexity.
Why is it so common?
Because its main focus is on quickly prioritizing the identified risks based on their perceived likelihood and the severity of their potential impact. It's efficient. It's not about getting exact numbers, but about rapidly sorting the big risks from the small ones.
So quick and dirty, but effective for triage.
That's a good way to put it. It helps you separate the must act on this now risks from the, okay, we can just keep an eye on this one risks.
What's the main tool we use for this qualitative sorting?
The fundamental tool here, the one you'll see everywhere, is the probability impact matrix, sometimes called a PI matrix or a risk matrix.
Okay, I think I've seen those. Like a grid?
Exactly. Imagine a grid, maybe a 5x5 grid is common.
Yeah.
Along one axis, you map the likelihood or probability of the risk occurring, perhaps using categories like very low, low, medium, high, very high. You might assign scores, say, 1 to 5.
Okay, probability on one side.
And on the other axis, you map the potential consequence or impact if the risk does occur. Again, using categories like insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, also scored maybe 1 to 5.
Probability times impact.
Right. You then assess each risk on your register against these scales. Where does it fall? Then you typically multiply the probability score by the impact score to get a combined risk factor or risk score.
So a risk that's very high probability, score 5, and has a catastrophic impact, score 5, gets a risk score.
25, exactly. That risk lands squarely in the red zone of your matrix. It immediately jumps to the top of your priority list, demanding urgent attention and detailed response planning.
Whereas something with very low probability, 1,
Right.
and insignificant impact, 1.
Gets a score of 1, it lands in the green zone. That kind of risk often just warrants passive acceptance or maybe very minimal monitoring. This simple matrix visually translates those subjective judgments about likelihood and severity into a clear, actionable priority list.
That seems really practical.
It is. And many successful organizations rely heavily on this qualitative approach just to maintain high awareness of the key risks. Microsoft, for instance, is known for using a technique called top 10 risk item tracking.
Top 10, just focusing on the worst ones.
Pretty much. It forces the project team and senior management to regularly review and discuss the status of the 10 most critical risks facing the project, those red zone items from the PI matrix. It keeps the spotlight firmly fixed on the highest priority threats and maybe the biggest opportunities too, ensuring the team doesn't get bogged down or distracted by lower priority issues. It's about focus.
Okay, qualitative gives us prioritization. But sometimes that's not enough detail, right? Especially for really big, complex, or high-stakes IT projects.
Precisely. That's where perform quantitative risk analysis comes in. This is process 4 in the PMBOK framework. This is the deeper dive, the more rigorous mathematical quantification of risk.
Quantitative numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We generally only use quantitative analysis when the qualitative assessment isn't sufficient. Maybe the project is extremely large, strategically critical, or involves risks with potentially huge financial implications where a simple high, medium, low isn't precise enough for decision-making.
So what's the goal of quantitative analysis?
The main goal is to numerically analyze the combined effect of identified individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty on the overall project objectives. We're typically looking at the potential impact on the total project cost and the final conclusion schedule.
Okay, looking at the big picture impact, what do you need to do this kind of analysis?
Well, importantly, you need good data. Quantitative analysis relies on verifiable data, maybe from historical records of similar past projects, from industry benchmarks, or sometimes from specialized expert judgment that can be quantified. You can't just pull numbers out of thin air. The quality of the output depends entirely on the quality of the input data.
Garbage in, garbage out.
The classic phrase, yes. Assuming you have decent data, one of the foundational calculations in quantitative risk analysis, especially for budget planning, is determining the expected monetary value, or EMV.
EMV. Okay, how does that work?
Okay. It's a core concept for figuring out how much money you might need to set aside for risks. The calculation itself looks deceptively straightforward. EMV equals the risk event probability, as a percentage or decimal, multiplied by the risk event's monetary value if it occurs, the cost of the impact.
Probability times monetary value. Let's do an example.
Okay. Let's say you identify a major risk related to integrating a complex third-party software component. Through analysis, you estimate there's a 20% probability, or 0.20, that this integration will fail badly, requiring significant rework.
Okay, 20% chance.
And if that failure occurs, you estimate the cost to recover extra developer time, testing, potential delays will be around $500,000.
So the EMV is?
The EMV calculation is 0.20 probability times $500,000 monetary value, which equals $100,000.
Okay, $100,000. But wait, that's not the cost if the risk happens, right? That's $500K. What is the $100?
Excellent question. The $100,000 EMV is not the actual cost of the event happening. It's the statistical cost of carrying that risk on your project. It represents the average anticipated cost from that specific risk over many similar projects.
The statistical cost. Why is that number crucial?
Because when you calculate the EMV for all the identified negative risks on your project register and you sum them up, that total sum establishes the basis for the necessary contingency reserves in your project budget.
Contingency reserves, money set aside for risks.
Exactly. This is budget allocated specifically to cover the potential costs of those known quantifiable risks that you've analyzed using EMV. It ensures that when that 20% probability event does occasionally happen, the budget has already statistically accounted for that possibility. You're not scrambling for funds.
That's powerful. Budgeting based on statistical risk exposure.
It's fundamental for realistic budgeting on complex projects. Now, beyond EMV for individual risks, we often use more advanced simulation techniques to look at the overall project uncertainty. The Monte Carlo analysis is probably the most famous of these.
Monte Carlo. Sounds like gambling.
It involves probability, but it's far from gambling. Instead of relying on a single deterministic estimate for something like the project completion date or the total cost.
Which we know is often wrong.
Which is often wildly optimistic, yes. Monte Carlo uses a range of estimates for key project variables, like task durations. Typically, you provide an optimistic estimate, a most likely estimate, and a pessimistic estimate. This is often called a three-point estimate or triangular distribution.
Optimistic, likely, pessimistic. Okay.
The Monte Carlo simulation software then runs the project model thousands or even tens of thousands of times. Each time, it randomly picks values for each variable from within their specified ranges based on their probability distributions.
So it simulates the project over and over with different possible outcomes.
Exactly. And the practical benefit of doing this is immense. For, say, a complex multi-vendor software integration project, you don't just get a single, likely to be wrong, completion date estimate like October 1st.
What do you get instead?
You get a statistical probability distribution of all possible completion dates. The output might look something like, based on the simulation, we have a 90% confidence level of completing this project sometime between October 15th and November 5th. Or, there's only a 10% chance we'll finish by the original target date of October 1st.
Wow. That gives management a much more realistic picture, doesn't it?
It dramatically improves decision-making. It provides a realistic range of potential dates and costs, along with the confidence levels associated with hitting different targets. This helps stakeholders make much better informed commitments about funding, resources, and go-live dates.
Okay, Monte Carlo for overall schedule cost uncertainty. What else?
Another really useful quantitative technique is sensitivity analysis. This helps us figure out which specific risks or uncertainties have the biggest potential impact on the project's overall objective.
Finding the biggest drivers of risk.
Precisely. Sensitivity analysis typically looks at the effect of changing just one project variable, like the cost of a key material or the productivity rate of the development team, while holding all others constant and seeing how much that one change impacts the overall project outcome, like total cost or finish date.
So you can see which factors the project outcome is most sensitive to.
Right. It often produces something called a tornado diagram, which visually ranks the variables from most sensitive to least sensitive. This immediately tells you which risks or uncertainties you should focus your mitigation efforts on for the biggest bang for your buck. If the project outcome is highly sensitive to the offshore team's productivity, that's where you need strong monitoring and maybe contingency plans.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Focus your energy where it matters most.
That's the idea. So the ultimate takeaway from this whole analysis phase, both qualitative and quantitative, is this. The assessment determines the urgency and the focus for the next step.
Which is?
High priority risks, the ones with high scores on the PI matrix or high EMV or high sensitivity, demand rigorous response planning and immediate resource allocation, which leads us directly into the action phase, planning what we're actually going to do about these risks.
Right, so we've done the analysis, we've prioritized our mountain of risks from the register, now we have to figure out what to actually do about them. This sounds like where the rubber meets the road.
It really is. This brings us to process 5, plan risk responses. This process is all about developing concrete options, selecting specific strategies, and agreeing on the actions we'll take to, well, enhance opportunities and reduce threats to the project objectives.
Okay, enhance opportunities, reduce threats. We need strategies for both sides of the coin again.
Absolutely. Let's start with the strategies for handling the negative risks, the threats. The Project Management Institute outlines 4 basic strategies here. The overall goal is always to reduce the probability of the risk occurring, or lessen its impact if it does occur, or maybe shift the responsibility elsewhere.
4 strategies for threats. What's number 1?
Number 1, and often the most effective if you can do it, is avoidance.
Avoidance. Just don't let it happen.
But pretty much. Risk avoidance means changing the project plan somehow to eliminate the threat entirely, often by eliminating its root cause.
Give me an IT example.
Okay. Let's say you're planning to integrate a brand new, unproven AI module into your software. Your analysis shows this carries a very high risk of performance instability and unpredictable behavior.
High risk, yeah.
An avoidance strategy might be to decide not to use that bleeding-edge AI module after all. Instead, you might opt to use a simpler, existing, well-understood rules engine that meets the core requirement, even if it's less innovative. You're sacrificing some potential wow factor to completely avoid the instability risk.
So changing the plan to sidestep the risk altogether.
Exactly. That's avoidance. The second strategy, and probably the most common one used in practice, is mitigation.
Mitigation. Reducing the risk.
Correct. Mitigation involves taking active steps to reduce the probability of the risk occurring or to reduce its impact if it does occur, or maybe both. You're not eliminating it, but you're lessening its potential damage.
Okay, examples of mitigation in IT.
Oh, tons. If the risk is potential data loss during a major server migration, mitigation strategies would include things like performing rigorous pre-migration testing, maybe running the old and new systems in parallel for a short time, and implementing robust automated cloud backups. These actions reduce the probability of loss and definitely reduce the impact if something does go wrong.
Makes sense. What about schedule risk?
If the risk is potential project schedule slippage, mitigation could involve assigning an extra experienced senior developer to a particularly complex module, or breaking the work down into smaller, more frequent sprints to catch integration problems earlier, or implementing stricter code review processes, all designed to lower the chance or severity of delays.
Okay, avoid, mitigate. What's number 3?
Number 3 is transference. Risk transference involves shifting the consequence of a threat and often the ownership of the response to a third party.
Handing it off to someone else.
Essentially, yes. It's important to note this doesn't make the risk disappear entirely, but it transfers the direct financial responsibility or liability if the risk occurs.
What's the classic IT example here? Insurance.
Insurance is a perfect example. Purchasing specialized cybersecurity insurance transfers the financial risk of a major data breach to the insurance company. Or another common one is outsourcing a particularly risky component of the project, say complex network infrastructure setup to a specialized vendor. Your contract with them would ideally include clauses that hold them financially accountable for performance failures or delays, effectively transferring some of that risk.
So contracts and insurance are key tools for transference.
Very much so. And the fourth strategy for negative risks is acceptance.
Acceptance, just live with it.
Sometimes, yes. Acceptance means deciding not to change the project plan to deal with a risk, or not being able to identify any other suitable response strategy. However, there's a crucial distinction here between two types of acceptance.
Okay.
There's active acceptance. This is where you acknowledge the risk, you understand its potential impact, and you deliberately set aside those contingency reserves we talked about earlier, calculated perhaps via EMV, specifically to handle the consequences if the risk occurs. You have a plan, even if the plan is just use this money if X happens.
So actively preparing for the possibility.
Right. Then there's passive acceptance. This means basically doing nothing. You don't set aside reserves, you don't develop a specific plan, you just decide you'll deal with the risk if and when it actually materializes, probably through workarounds.
When is passive acceptance okay? Sounds risky.
It is risky. Passive acceptance is generally only considered appropriate for risks that have a very low probability of occurring and a very low potential impact. For anything significant, active acceptance or another strategy is usually much wiser.
Okay, so 4 strategies for threats. Avoid, mitigate, transfer, accept, actively or passively.
Got it.
Now, what about the other side, the opportunities?
Right, we can't forget the positive risks. We also need strategies for actively capitalizing on opportunities. Here again, PMBOK outlines 4 main strategies. The goal now is the opposite. We want to increase the probability of the positive risk occurring or maximize its positive impact if it does happen.
Okay, 4 strategies for opportunities. What's the first?
The first strategy is exploitation. This is the most aggressive strategy for opportunities.
Exploitation. Sounds strong.
It means doing whatever you possibly can to make sure that positive risk event definitely occurs. You're trying to seize the opportunity with both hands.
Example.
Let's say during user acceptance testing, you discover that a new feature you developed is unexpectedly robust, incredibly popular with testers, and highly marketable, much more so than you initially thought.
A surprise hit.
Exactly. An exploitation strategy would involve immediately reallocating resources, maybe pulling your best developers off less critical tasks to focus on perfecting and accelerating the release of that specific feature to maximize the positive market reaction and capture that unexpected value as quickly as possible.
Go all in on the winner.
Pretty much. That's exploitation. The second strategy is enhancement.
Enhancement, making it better.
Kind of. Enhancement focuses on increasing the probability of the opportunity occurring or increasing its potential positive impact, or both. You're not necessarily guaranteeing it happens like in exploitation, but you're actively trying to boost its chances or its payoff.
How would that look?
Maybe you notice a positive market trend where your main competitors seem to be struggling with their product launches. An enhancement strategy might involve allocating some additional marketing budget to highlight your product's strengths, or perhaps adding a couple of small, easy-to-implement feature improvements based on early feedback. These actions increase the chance that your project will successfully capture more market share due to the competitor's weakness. You're nudging the odds in your favor.
Okay, exploitation is seize it, enhancement is boost it. What's next?
Third is sharing. Risk sharing applies to opportunities too. This involves allocating ownership of an opportunity to a third party who is better equipped to capture the benefit for the project.
Sharing the opportunity. Why would you do that?
Usually because the third party has specific expertise, resources, or market access that you lack, which maximizes the overall chance of success. Think about forming a joint venture or a strategic partnership with another company to co-develop a new platform feature. They bring specialized tech, you bring market access, and together you share the risks and the potential rewards, maximizing the positive outcome for both parties in a way neither could achieve alone.
So, partnering for mutual gain.
That's a good way to think of sharing. And the fourth strategy for opportunities, mirroring the threat side, is acceptance.
Accepting an opportunity. Just letting it happen.
Basically, yes. Opportunity acceptance means being willing to take advantage of the positive risk if it happens to materialize, but without actively pursuing it beforehand. Maybe a key third-party open-source library that your project depends on unexpectedly releases a major update that dramatically improves performance and efficiency. You didn't plan for it, You didn't try to make it happen, but when it occurs, you gladly accept the benefits, you update your project, use the new version, and enjoy the performance boost. You didn't exploit or enhance, you just accepted the good fortune.
Okay, so for opportunities, exploit, enhance, share, accept. Makes sense. Now, you mentioned contingency reserves earlier when talking about EMV and active acceptance of threats. Let's talk more about funding these responses.
Absolutely critical. This response planning process is directly tied to the project budget, and we need to be really clear about the two main types of funding reserves used in project management.
Okay, two types. What are they?
First, as we discussed, we have contingency reserves. These are the funds budgeted and set aside specifically to address the known risks, the specific threats, and maybe opportunities that are listed in your risk register and have been analyzed, often quantitatively using EMV. This money is typically controlled by the project manager and is part of the project's cost baseline. It's for the known unknowns.
Known unknowns. The risks you know about but aren't sure if or when they'll hit.
Exactly. Then, separate from that, we have management reserves.
Management reserves, different pot of money.
Different pot, different purpose. Management reserves are funds held by senior management outside of the project's baseline budget. This money is earmarked specifically for dealing with unknown risks or emergent risks, the true unknown unknowns.
The things you couldn't possibly have foreseen.
Right. Things like a sudden, unprecedented global pandemic shutting down supply chains, or a massive, unexpected regulatory shift that fundamentally changes the project's requirements. This money isn't controlled by the PM. It requires formal approval from senior management to be released and added to the project budget when a genuinely unforeseen, unplannable event occurs that wasn't accounted for in the risk register or contingency reserves.
So contingency reserves for the expected problems, known risks. Management reserves for the total surprises, unknown risks.
That's the essential distinction. And tied to these reserves, especially contingency, are your actual plans. You need contingency plans. These are predefined actions or workarounds that the project team will execute if a specific known risk event actually occurs. If risk X happens, we will do A, B, and C.
Got it. Pre-planned actions.
And for particularly high-impact risks, even if you have a mitigation strategy, you might also develop fallback plans. These are backup plans, Plan B, that you'll implement if your primary risk response strategy, like mitigation or avoidance, turns out not to be effective and the risk still occurs with severe consequences.
So a backup to the backup.
For the really critical stuff, yes. It's about having layers of defense.
Okay, one last thing on planning responses.
Yeah.
Can the responses themselves cause new problems?
Oh, absolutely. That's a crucial point. We must always consider and track secondary risks.
Secondary risks.
These are new risks that arise as a direct result of implementing one of your chosen risk responses.
Give me an example.
Let's say you decide to mitigate an internal technical skills gap risk, a threat. By using the transference strategy, you outsource a complex development module to a new, relatively inexpensive offshore vendor.
Okay, you transferred the skills risk.
Yes, but in doing so, you might have just introduced several new secondary risks, maybe risks related to time zone differences causing communication delays, or potential data security vulnerabilities with the offshore team, or quality control issues due to lack of direct oversight.
Solving one problem created others.
Exactly. So when you plan a response, you must also identify any potential secondary risks that response might create. And guess what? Those secondary risks need to be added to the risk register, analyzed, and managed just as rigorously as the original risks. It's a continuous cycle.
Wow, okay. Risk management really is an ongoing vigilance task. Okay, we've done the planning, the analysis, the response strategy development. Now we actually have to make it happen and keep watching. What comes next?
Now we move into the executing and monitoring phases of the risk management lifecycle. Process 6 is implement risk responses. This is part of the overall project execution phase. It's simply about ensuring that the agreed-upon risk response plans, the avoidance, mitigation, transference, exploitation actions we decided on are actually carried out by the assigned risk owners.
So, putting the plans into action. What does that typically involve?
Often, implementing a risk response will require a formal change request to update the project's scope, schedule, or budget baselines. Or it might just involve updating project documents, assigning specific tasks, and making sure the work gets done. It's the doing part of the plan.
Makes sense. And that leads directly into the final process.
It does. Process 7 is monitor risks. And this, as we've said, is the truly continuous part of the cycle. It happens throughout the entire project duration. It's the project managers and the team's day-to-day vigilance.
Monitoring. What exactly are we monitoring for?
Several things. First, you're tracking the identified risks on your register to see if their status has changed. Has the probability gone up or down? Has the potential impact increased? Second, you're checking if the implemented risk responses are actually being effective. Is the mitigation working as expected?
Okay, tracking existing risks and checking responses. What else?
Crucially, you're constantly scanning the horizon for new risks that might have emerged since your last identification exercise. The project environment changes, technology evolves, stakeholders shift, new uncertainties pop up all the time.
So, ongoing identification too.
Yes. And finally, you're tracking residual risks.
Residual risks, what are those?
These are the risks that remain even after your risk response strategies have been implemented. No response is usually 100% effective. For example, even if you mitigate a security vulnerability risk with patching and firewalls, there might still be a small residual risk of a breach remaining. You need to acknowledge and track that remaining level of exposure.
Got it. Some risk always remains.
Yeah.
How do we keep track of all this monitoring visually?
Transparency is absolutely paramount here. We use various tools. One common one is the risk burn-down chart. It works much like a story point burn-down chart you see in Agile development.
How does it work for risks?
You typically plot the overall risk exposure of the project, maybe represented by the sum of the risk scores, or EMVs, of all active risks against time. As you implement mitigation actions and risks are closed out or reduced, you should see the total risk exposure burn down over the project lifecycle. It's a great visual indicator of progress in managing risk.
Nice. What else?
There's also the practice, especially in co-located teams, sometimes called risk walling. This involves physically posting key risk artifacts. The risk register, the PI matrix, the risk burn-down chart, maybe a Kanban board showing risk mitigation tasks on a wall in the team area.
Making it highly visible.
Exactly. Maximum transparency. It keeps risk front and center in everyone's mind, encourages discussion during daily stand-ups, and facilitates constant feedback on risk status.
Okay, monitoring is key.
Yeah.
But we know things still go wrong. Let's talk about the human element again. What are the common mistakes people make in implementing and monitoring risk management?
Yes. Despite having structured processes, projects still get derailed by recurring mistakes. Our sources highlight several critical errors, often rooted in human behavior or oversight.
What's number one on the hit list?
I'd say the first, and arguably still the most dangerous, is simply failing to adequately identify the risks in the first place, particularly overlooking external factors like third-party vendor dependencies or systemic weaknesses within the organization, maybe like poor change control processes.
Like the London Whale example, underestimating the risk in their own tools.
Exactly, or ignoring supply chain vulnerabilities. If your identification isn't thorough and honest, everything else is built on a shaky foundation. Risk identification needs to be ruthless.
Okay. Failure to identify. What's another common mistake?
Second, failing to conduct a proper risk assessment or analysis. This means critical risks end up being poorly prioritized. If you treat a potential $500,000 loss with the same casual approach as a $5,000 potential loss because you didn't quantify or square properly, you're misallocating resources and exposing the project to unnecessary danger.
So poor prioritization.
Third, a really common one. Failing to update the risk management documents regularly, especially the risk register. Risks are dynamic, they change constantly. A risk register that hasn't been reviewed or updated in 3 months is practically worthless as a management tool. It has to be a living document.
Stale information is bad information. Okay, fourth mistake.
Fourth, failing to communicate risks effectively. This is huge. Not sharing risk information clearly and promptly with team members, stakeholders, and management. If the development team doesn't understand the security risks associated with certain coding practices because no one told them clearly,
then poor preparation and ineffective management are pretty much guaranteed.
Yeah.
Leads to delays, breaches, you name it.
Absolutely. Fifth mistake is adopting ineffective or overly generic mitigation strategies. Just writing down, "we will mitigate integration risk" in the register is useless.
Need specifics.
It needs specifics. What exactly will you do? A better mitigation statement would be something like, "we will implement automated daily integration testing between components X and Y, starting in Sprint 3, owned by the QA lead. Vague responses lead to inaction.
Okay, be specific. Number 6.
Sixth, and increasingly critical in today's interconnected world, is neglecting risks associated with third parties, your vendors, your partners, your suppliers. We saw massive disruptions recently due to hardware shortages and supply chain failures.
Yeah, that hit a lot of IT projects hard.
It demonstrated clearly that your project is often only as resilient as its weakest external link. You need robust contracts, yes, but also dedicated monitoring and contingency plans specifically for your key third-party dependencies. You can't just assume they'll deliver.
Assume nothing.
Got it.
And the 7th common mistake.
This one is perhaps the most fundamental mindset issue. Taking a consistently reactive approach to risk instead of a proactive approach.
Fighting fires instead of preventing them.
Exactly. Effective risk management is about foresight, identifying potential problems before they occur, and implementing preventive measures or planned responses. Constantly scrambling for workarounds after a risk materializes is almost always more expensive, more time-consuming, and more stressful than proactive prevention.
Proactive, not reactive. That sounds like a core principle.
It absolutely is. And this proactive, continuous, iterative approach to managing uncertainty is actually perfectly suited to Agile environments.
Ah, Agile. How does risk management work differently there? Seems like it would be a natural fit.
It is a very natural fit. Agile's core iterative nature planning, building, testing, reviewing in short cycles is inherently geared towards identifying and responding to uncertainty quickly, which minimizes the long-term impact of risks.
So risk isn't a separate phase, it's embedded.
Precisely. In well-run Agile projects, risk is discussed constantly. It might be a standing item in sprint planning meetings, or brought up during daily stand-ups if someone encounters an impediment that has risk implications. The process tends to be less about creating massive formal documentation up front.
And more about conversation and collaboration.
Exactly. It's more about fostering a team culture where identifying and discussing risks openly is encouraged and expected. Interestingly, the ownership of risk often becomes more distributed too.
How so?
Instead of a single dedicated risk manager, the responsibility for identifying, assessing, and even mitigating risks is often shared across the entire project team. Team members closest to the work often own the risks related to their specific tasks. The traditional risk manager role, if it exists, often shifts towards being more of a facilitator, someone who coaches the team on risk techniques and ensures the conversations are happening, rather than owning all the risks themselves.
Empowering the team. How are the concepts adapted? Are there specific Agile risk techniques?
Yes, the concepts are adapted quite seamlessly. For instance, we often use risk tasking.
Risk tasking.
This is where, when a significant risk is identified, you create specific tasks designed to address or mitigate that risk, and those tasks are added directly into the product backlog, just like any other feature or user story.
So risk mitigation becomes part of the planned work.
Exactly. If the team identifies a potential authentication failure as a high risk for an upcoming feature, a task like implement two-factor authentication for all user logins, or conduct penetration testing on the authentication module gets prioritized and pulled into a sprint backlog to be worked on immediately.
Makes the response very tangible.
Very. We also use risk tagging. This is more about modifying how certain activities are executed to account for risks.
Tagging activities.
Yeah. For example, a user story related to processing sensitive financial data might be tagged perhaps with a visual icon on the team's Kanban board or task tracker to indicate that it requires specific risk mitigation actions during development, like mandatory pair programming or an extra level of security code review before it can be considered done. It flags activities needing extra vigilance.
Okay, risk tasking and risk tagging. Adapting risk management into the Agile flow.
Right. It becomes integrated, continuous, and collaborative.
Now let's take a step back and connect this discipline to the bigger picture of project control. How does project risk management integrate with something like earned value management, EVM? They sound like they should work together.
They absolutely should. And they do. They are critical partners, especially in maintaining financial oversight and realistic forecasting on larger projects where EVM is used.
How does PRM inform EVM?
Well, remember how EVM relies on having an accurate performance measurement baseline, PMB, the plan, cost, and schedule?
Right, the baseline you measure progress against.
Project risk management, particularly the quantitative analysis part, like EMV and Monte Carlo, directly informs the realistic estimation of that PMB. By identifying potential risks and building in those contingency reserves based on EMV calculations, PRM helps ensure that the cost and schedule baselines used for EVM are actually achievable and account for known uncertainties. It prevents the baseline from being overly optimistic.
So risk analysis makes the EVM baseline more credible.
Exactly. And it also helps justify the management reserve, MR, that separate pot of money for unknown risks, which sits outside the PMB but is part of the total project budget reported.
Okay. How do they interact during the project?
They interface primarily through integrated change control. Remember, management reserves are for the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, the big surprises.
When your ongoing risk monitoring process identifies a significant new risk, something that truly wasn't foreseen and isn't covered by contingency reserves, that emergent risk needs to be assessed. If management approves activating the management reserve to deal with it, those funds are formally transferred into the project's baseline, specifically into contingency reserves now that the risk is known. This triggers a formal baseline change request.
So identifying a new major risk can trigger drawing down MR and updating the EVM baseline.
Precisely. Risk review feeds directly into integrated baseline change management, ensuring that your EVM tracking remains accurate and reflects the current understanding of project risks and costs. They work hand in hand to provide realistic project control.
Okay, that connection is clear. Before we wrap up, are there any major emerging trends in risk management we should be aware of? Is the field evolving?
Oh, definitely. The thinking around risk is constantly evolving, especially with the increasing complexity of IT projects and the business environment.
Like what?
One significant trend is a greater focus on non-event risks.
Non-event risks. Isn't risk always about an event happening?
Traditionally, yes, we focused on discrete events. But non-event risks stem from inherent uncertainty that exists over time, not just from a single potential occurrence. There are two main types being discussed more now.
Okay, what are they?
First, variability risks. These relate to uncertainty around the potential spread of outcomes for planned activities. For example, the risk isn't that a task won't get done, but that the productivity rate might be consistently lower than estimated, or the number of errors found during testing might be much higher than planned. It's uncertainty in the range of performance.
So uncertainty in how well things go, not just if they happen.
Right. The second type is ambiguity risks. These arise from a lack of knowledge or understanding. Think about the uncertainty surrounding the future development of government regulations in a new market you're entering, or the inherent complexity and potential for unforeseen problems when trying to integrate multiple, large, independently evolving legacy systems. It's risk stemming from what we don't know.
Variability and ambiguity requires a different kind of thinking than just event-based risk.
It does. It requires more adaptive planning and continuous monitoring of these background uncertainties. And this ties into another major trend: the growing importance of project resilience.
Resilience, bouncing back.
More than just bouncing back, it's about designing projects and empowering teams in a way that allows them to effectively handle emergent risk, those truly unknowable unknowns that inevitably crop up on complex projects. Resilience isn't just about having reserves, it's about having flexible processes, transparent communication, clear escalation paths, and critically empowered teams that have the authority and trust to adapt and pivot quickly when the unexpected inevitably hits.
Building in the capacity to handle surprises.
Exactly. And finally, no discussion of emerging trends in IT is complete without mentioning technology itself. Artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML, are poised to significantly impact risk management.
How can AI help with risk?
In several ways. AAM algorithms can analyze vast amounts of historical project data schedules, costs, risk registers, issue logs from past projects to identify patterns, and potentially spot emerging risks much earlier than human analysis alone could.
Early warning system.
Potentially, yes. AI could also help in making more objective, data-driven decisions about where to prioritize mitigation efforts by predicting the likely effectiveness of different strategies based on past outcomes. It could automate parts of the monitoring process, freeing up human project managers to focus on strategic decision-making and communication. The potential to save time and avoid repeating past failures is significant.
Fascinating. Using tech to manage the risks inherent in developing tech.
It brings us full circle, doesn't it? From the fundamental definition of uncertainty right through to the cutting-edge technology that might, eventually, help us get better at mastering it. #TagOutro.
Wow, that was a truly deep dive. We've really journeyed through the entire landscape of IT project risk management today. It's crystal clear now that risk isn't just about, avoiding failure. It's really about strategically navigating and capitalizing on uncertainty, tackling both the threats and seizing the opportunities.
Absolutely. We've covered that core definition of risk as uncertain events with positive or negative effects. We detailed those 7 essential PMBOK processes, from the crucial upfront planning and identification
Through the rigorous qualitative and quantitative analysis.
into proactive response planning for both threats and opportunities, and then emphasizing that continuous implementation and monitoring loop.
And we touched on how this all adapts in agile environments and the critical importance of professional discipline, avoiding those common mistakes.
And hopefully for you listening, particularly students heading into IT careers or managing group projects, SO2, SO3, understanding these concepts provides a solid foundation, KO1, KO3. Being proactive, understanding your organization's risk appetite, mastering tools like the PI matrix, and maybe even EMV, KO2.
Yeah, these aren't just textbook terms, KO3.
Yeah, not at all. They are the fundamental skills you need to manage complex IT projects effectively, KO2, and frankly, to turn that inherent uncertainty into a strategic advantage rather than just a source of stress. This structured, proactive approach really is the fundamental difference between just reacting to crises as they happen and successfully leading a complex project through the storm to completion.
We really hope this discussion has given you a clearer blueprint, a better mental model for how to approach risk in your future IT roles, your studies, and maybe even your current group projects.
Definitely.
And remember, please check out the episode description. We put links to some great resources there that expand on everything we talked about today. And if you found this valuable, please do like, share, and maybe leave a comment. It really helps other learners find this essential information.
So, as we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final, maybe provocative thought. It ties back to those high stakes we discussed at the very beginning, the potential cost of PRM failure. Here it is. If every single IT project across the globe suddenly failed tomorrow, what part of your world, the app you rely on, the network you use, the vital system you interact with, what part would come crashing down first?
It really makes you think about the hidden infrastructure. Behind every app launch you see, every online order you place, every single digital innovation that shapes our lives, there's IT project management working, often unseen, to make it possible. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world where ideas become projects and projects shape our future.